Hello there.
Ahem. I want to talk a bit about what is considered normal. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, the normal I will be talking about can be understood as the expected way of being. This can exist both in direct ways, like how we assume heterosexuality in everyone we meet, and in less direct ways, like how we treat media made by or prominently featuring people in minorities or women as inherently political, even if the media isn't speaking about the political barriers faced by those people, just because we as an audience have been taught to see the complete domination of a certain kind of person in media as normal. The aim of this essay will be to attempt to explain why I think the idea of perceiving one way of being as normal is inherently harmful. So let's get into it. There are a lot of harmful social norms. Not all of them, of course. A lot of them, in fact, have tangible reasons for existing. You avoid asking a question to not make someone uncomfortable. You avoid making noise in a library to not disturb anyone reading. And you wait in line to make life simpler for everyone around you. Other times, however, norms can cause harm while existing without sufficient reasoning behind them. Think about the norms that exist around gender, for instance. If you are or are seen as a boy, you have to be strong and fight your pesky little emotions by stuffing them under the pillow, even in the darkest times. Doing anything considered feminine will get you laughed at and rejected, so you avoid doing such things at all costs. If you are or are seen as a girl, you have to make yourself constantly presentable while still pretending to just naturally look like that. If you don't, you get shamed for being ugly, and if you overdo it, you get shamed for faking your appearance. When it comes to gender, this is the normal or default way of being. If you disobey these norms, for instance by wearing a dress if you're seen as a man, or having short hair if you're seen as a woman, you get treated as different. Since you're not doing the normal thing of following established gender norms or gender roles, you're being rebellious. But rebellious against what? The only reason gender roles exist is just like with all other norms, because we as a society make them exist. We grow up surrounded by adults conforming to them, and soon learn how the patterns after which the adults behave work. We then go to school, where the idea that gender is an impenetrable barrier separating humans is reinforced, both formally and informally. When you line up to go to the cafeteria, or when you get assigned a team in gym class, your gender often decides where you'll be put. And when your classmates talk about gender as something that decides your behaviors, boys are so gross, or girls are stupid, or forms friend groups, mostly based on the genders of the members. Gender is turned into something that puts people into one of two fundamentally different categories. This, and much more, lays the groundwork for starting to see the rules imposed on humans as by gender roles as normal, and therefore also the idea that you should adhere to the normal way of behaving, and to view deviation from it as bad in the minds of the children, and makes them later recreate the systems that push them into those rules to begin with as they nurture the next generation. This idea that there is a normal way a person of a given gender should behave is then not created by some higher authority, but is continually created by all of us, which means that when we view those who challenge gender roles as different, we perpetuate those same gender roles by implying there is such a thing as a normal way a person of a given gender can behave. Why can we not instead see them as just behaving the way they want to behave, while doing the same to those conforming to gender norms? I also want to stress that even if viewing someone that is not conforming to gender roles as different isn't meant in a negative way, it still places the rules imposed on us by gender norms in the position of being seen as normal. It's okay to be different, you say. Well, what do you mean by different? If it's okay to be different, why are we still implying there is a normal? Why should we give one way of being the privilege of being seen as the normal and treat people challenging it as different? Ideas of a normal or default way of being don't just exist within how we expect people to behave based on gender, of course, but in a lot of social justice causes. In attraction, it's allo-heterosexuality. In race and ethnicity, it's usually Christian-descended whiteness. In neurology, it's being neurotypical. In body shape, it's being straight-sized. In other aspects of gender, it's usually maleness. And in your relation to your gender assigned at birth, it's being cis. It's very common for people living within these bubbles, and even for some who live outside of some of them but inside some other ones, to assume others also fall into their idea of normal. One way of seeing this is by looking at the concept of coming out. Because society at large assumes everyone to be cishet, we end up in a situation where LGBTQ plus people are forced to reveal to their environment that the assumptions the people around them have made, in fact, are wrong. This places the burden for not having your identity get incorrectly understood on the person getting their identity incorrectly understood by forcing them to either keep having their identity get incorrectly understood or by coming out. This is usually an extremely stressful experience for most people, as knowing how people are going to react to you, showing yourself fully, can never be predicted. You personally probably have some of these biases too. I know I do. We can expose this by having you imagine a family. Is there one in your mind? Good. Now, how is it structured? Does it perhaps consist of a mother, a father, and some number of children? How does its racial makeup look like? Are they all white? How does the family work economically? Is the father the primary monetary provider while a mother is the primary caregiver? I'm guessing that for a lot of you, the family you just imagined checked all or most of these boxes, which really isn't that strange. After all, in a lot of your minds, this is what a normal family, or just a family, looks like. If this was true for you, you were probably raised in an environment where families like this really were significantly more common than any other kind. This meant you were never exposed to any other family structure. So when you now later in life are exposed to alternatives, you come to view them as exceptions to the rule, instead of just another variation similar to the variation you're used to. This, together with social norms similar to those previously discussed, has made you subconsciously see white, heteropatriarchal families as normal and others as different, which has made you assume that the type of family you're used to is just the default version of a family, instead of one of many ways a family can look. This shows that people like you, who live isolated from other social groups, have ingrained in them the idea that they are normal and that others are a deviation from that normal. This mentality creates a relationship between that considered normal and that considered different, where the normal is seen as superior to the different, which can be seen in a lot of the talking points of social conservatives. Queer people in media is indoctrinating our children, for example, only works if you see a complete lack of LGBTQ plus representation as normal, and therefore complete domination of cis heterosexuality in media as normal. For the people who believe this, seeing people who do not conform to their idea of what is normal can feel like an attack on their person. After a lifetime of carefully suppressing any kind of individuality to conform to what has been expected of them, they see something that seemingly violates the rules they fight to preserve get treated as a good thing by the public and get angry at it. Very angry. Because of how much they've internalized oppressive social norms and how much they've made them a part of their sense of selves, these conservatives feel personally attacked and lash out at any kind of representation of an other with contempt, an other which can only exist because they have an idea of cisgender heterosexuality being the only correct or normal way of being. As previously mentioned, seeing one way of being as normal doesn't have to lead literally as seeing one way of being as better than others, like how social conservatives see it, but can happen simply due to not knowing better. This, however, still places the ways of being considered different at a lower social rank than other ways of being. The normal is the expected way of being, and following it is desirable. However, if you cannot follow it, that is okay. Due to not conforming to the normal, however, you will be branded as different. This will mean you will be separated from us within the normal, through us not being able to relate to your experience, and members of our group harassing you for not being normal, which will lead to isolation from participating normally in our community, but will also turn you into an object of constant evaluation. Those who inhabit the normal space collectively get the privilege to decide who can be accepted into it, and when something or someone is not part of the group, they test them or it for compliance with the rules set by the normal. Here's an example of this. A lot of people think trans people have to prove they are the gender they say they are before they can be accepted as their real gender. Trans people, in their eyes, have to make an attempt to be feminine or masculine, by which they mean they have to conform to established gender roles or not be seen as their real gender. They also don't think non-binary people exist, or only accept them as long as they make an effort to appear androgynous. These people, who are usually cis or well-passing trans people, who see themselves as, and because of that, together with their position in society being already established as opposed to non-passing trans peoples, become the normal, are placing rules on trans people from outside, in this case making the world more hostile towards and dehumanizing non-passing trans people and non-binary people. This is obviously completely unacceptable. Trans people are valid no matter if they conform to gender norms or not, and saying that they aren't, on top of being transphobic, just perpetuates patriarchal gender roles. If we define womanhood for trans women by their ability to conform to previously discussed gender roles, we're essentially saying that women have to conform to standards that turn them into objects for pleasure for men to even be women. This makes the fact that many of these people call themselves feminists very funny. All of this then makes it quite easy to understand why so many within these normal spheres have such an aversion to being given a label for their own way of being. TERFs claiming that there is no such thing as a cis woman, etc. They've gotten used to just being seen as the default or normal, with others being deviations. And since being the normal gives them a higher cultural status, they see their way of being treated as just another way of being, as a step down in the hierarchy. The fact that there is a hierarchy in the first place, however, is never questioned, but is treated as simply an obvious fact of life, which, as I hope I have now highlighted, it is not. Ultimately, seeing one way of being as normal is kind of unavoidable for us privileged people. However, that's not an excuse to not attempt to break down our existing biases. When you play a game with a friend and default to seeing all other players as male due to their biases known as gender roles that have been drilled into your head, when you say it's okay to be different in an attempt to be supportive, when you ask someone whether they've got a boyfriend or girlfriend yet due to assuming they're straight and allo, or when you assume someone's pronouns before they've told you which ones they use due to subconsciously or not conflating gender identity with gender roles and expression. This one is particularly hard, even for me, a non-binary attack helicopter. You're contributing to upholding the idea that there is a normal, default, or correct way of being. This, if done on a large enough scale, creates and perpetuates a hierarchy in ways of being and social norms to support it, and causes harms to real human beings. What you as an individual can do to change this is of course very limited. Acknowledging and making an active effort to not perpetuate the idea of a normal way of being through your own actions. But if we could all collectively stop assuming one way of being, people's identities would no longer be restricted by other people's assumptions, and no one way of being would be given the privilege of being seen as the normal. Your sexuality and gender, for example, would no longer be taken for granted based on cultural ideas, but would be asked for in situations where they became relevant. There is no single normal way of being. Every person is different from every other, and that's not a bad thing. Can we stop seeing one way of being as better than all others, even when we aren't doing so consciously? Oh wow, yeah, that was an essay, alright. Not a good one, but certainly an essay. This has been a really annoying one to write, and I hope the final product has not wasted your time, but I feel like you've made this video too broad and should instead have focused on a particular example of something through which I could explain my ideas. Or, yeah, maybe not. I don't know. Anyway, this is on the internet now, so I think I can finally leave it alone without any more tinkering. If you, for whatever reason, thought I said something interesting, you can maybe subscribe, or you could not do that. You could instead leave a comment telling me about all the mistakes I made. Honestly, that would be great too. It would really help me out. I really love constructive criticism. Okay, bye.